freedom fighters are questioning the appointment, or at least, should we say, the imminent appointment of called Rush Consortium as the national lottery operator. The party claims that some of the National Lotteries Commission members and Evaluation Committee have close ties to this consortium. EFF wants the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition, Pakstow, to account on the appointment process. Let's speak now to EFF spokesperson and Member of Parliament, Snao Tambo, who joins us in studio tonight. Mr. Tambo, good evening to you, and thank you very much for your time. Let's start with why you are so concerned, and in a way, your statement is written as though this particular consortium, Gold Rush, has already been appointed when, in fact, the minister has yet to make an announcement.
Look, thanks and greetings to your viewers. I think the first thing, and we must emphasize, is that we are not only raising the alarm now about the likely and possible appointment of ANC-aligned companies to operate the license of the National Lotteries Commission. So I sit on the Portfolio Committee for Trade, Industry and Competition, and on the 5th of March, to be exact, I raised a myriad of issues that I found as discrepancies with regards to the shortlisting of the bidders in the first place. So the shortlisting of bidders for the National Lotteries Commission included a lot of companies which have financial ties with the African National Congress, institutions such as Batu Trust, which is a subsidiary of Tebe Investments, which donated upwards of 60 million to the ANC in 2021. Institutions such as Hoskins Consolidated Investments, whose CEO is Jeremy Copeland, who was a member of parliament of the ANC in the 90s, donated to the CR17 campaign. And now this Gold Rush Consortium, which is led by one Sandile Zungu, who we all know was public knowledge contested the provincial chairpersonship of KwaZulu-Natal in 2022. So that imminent appointment is something we have on good knowledge. And the minister is set to make his announcement on the 28th of May, which is very imminent. So we have written to him to refrain to making such a pronouncement before the 28th of May until he comes to account to the committee about the discrepancies which we've identified, which includes, as you've mentioned, 2 evaluation committee members who have ties with Gold Rush Consortium. One attended their gala dinner. The other is said to have control and ownership of the gambling machines of Gold Rush Consortiums at an establishment in the city of Tshwane. So these are the discrepancies that we're raising, and we think that he must come and account as to what is going on. All right.
There are 8 bidders for this license. Out of those 8, who is the EFF most comfortable with?
I think the EFF does not have an interest in terms of who gets appointed. We have an interest in ensuring that there's no political influence or political exposure.
It is in that frame, it is in that particular thinking that I'm asking this question.
Absolutely. So the National Lotteries Act, and this should be what guides our conversation in terms of a legislative framework, stipulates in Section 13, subsection 4 to be exact, that the company that receives the operating license of the National Lotteries should not have political interest in terms of shareholding or have financial interest from any political players. So that is the basis from which we've isolated not only the forum of Sandile Zungu, the Gold Rush Consortium, because we must never separate it from its ANC link. Not only have we identified them, we identified Batu Trust, the subsidiary of Tebe Investments. We identified Hoskins Consolidated Investments, which has ties with SACTU, which is a union of COSATU. So they're not the only company we've identified with having direct financial links with the African National Congress. And this Gold Rush Consortium is one of those that we've identified to be a company that will violate the National Lotteries Act if it continues to be appointed. So our interest is protecting the sanctity of the National Lotteries Act and the legislative process, but also ensuring that an institution such as the National Lotteries, because a lot of South Africans don't know what it does because it's been riddled by corruption, by the way. It's supposed to provide funding for critical institutions that are involved in sports development, in health development, small businesses and entrepreneurs. But it has been marred by corruption allegations, not giving grants to people who need them. And if it falls in the political hands of anyone who's trying to resurrect themselves, such as the ANC in KZN, which lost so much support, That has to be prevented and it has to be protected.
Look, the history of the National Lotteries Commission is well documented in terms of what has been found there. Let me remind you of what Minister Pakstau said. This was shortly after his appointment, and it was in particular regard to the appointment of the next lottery operator. These were his words, and I quote. He said he needed to ensure that there is no political party or political office bearer who has any direct financial interest in the applicant or shareholder of the applicant. Do you not trust that the minister will run a transparent process that is tied to what the legislation prescribes?
He's in advanced negotiations with Gold Rush Consortium, and that can be confirmed because they made a market communication which states that they are in advanced stages of negotiations which may require an expansion of their business operations. That's also a violation of National Lotteries Act, by the way, because the Act stipulates that the minister must consider the bidder who will have existent and unconstrained capacity to operate national lotteries. So Gold Rush Consortium already concedes that with that market communication. So the lack of transparency and him being in advanced negotiations with an institution that has ties to a funder of the African National Congress, a former opponent of people who contested a national provincial conference in KwaZulu-Natal. He hasn't been transparent about his advanced negotiations in that regard. Makes me not trust him. But
Sandile
more than
Zungu may
that,
come, I'm sorry to interrupt, Sandile Zungu may come and say he doesn't hold political office.
I'd love you to invite him to come and say that. I would love, that would be a perfect thing. If you could do that, I would appreciate it, because that will open a much larger can of worms that I do not think he would want to be opened. But leaving that alone, because I think he'll have his right of reply, which I'm sure you'll afford him. I do not trust the messaging of the ANC when it comes to its commitment to anti-corruption or renewal. I think it is cheap. I think it's not worth the paper it's written on, not worth the lips that it comes from. Because even earlier today, we saw in Parliament a simple question from a member of Parliament asking about the appointment of the son of Gwede Mantashe to chair SETA board, whether it was true or not from a Director General in the Department of Higher Education. He was beaten up and thrown out of a portfolio committee sitting at the behest of a chairperson of the ANC. So I do not trust the message of the ANC on renewal. I do not trust the message of the ANC on transparency. And Pakstau is a member of the ANC who's not serving renewal, in my personal view. The messaging of the ANC is not worth the paper it is written on. And I think we should allow Pakstau, whom we've given 24 hours to respond to our letter of demand, which we sent this morning. And let's see tomorrow if he's worth the salt that he's saying in that statement that you're stating there.
As we quickly wrap up this conversation, if Gold Rush is announced, because the understanding is that before the end of May, there has to be some kind of announcement. If it is announced, what will your next steps be as the EFF?
Look, in the letter we wrote to Pakstau this morning, we told him that he must refrain from making any announcement before he appears before the portfolio committee. And then we reserved our legal rights as the EFF to pursue any legal relief necessary, which includes and is not limited to instituting an interdict of that announcement process. So he's got that 24 hours to tell us whether he'll allow us to pursue that process or whether he will come to account to the portfolio committee as well. But I can tell you now confidently, I have personally been in conversation with the legal team of the EFF, and we are making the necessary preparations to ensure that we either interdict that process or we take Pakstau himself through a judicial process to hold him accountable for violations of the National Lotteries Act and for possible collusion and corruption in the awarding of the bidding licenses for the operations of the National Lottery. We wrote to Mzwandile Masina as well, who's the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee for Trade, Industry and Competition, imploring on him to write formally to the minister to refrain from making any announcement of any successful bidder, not only Gold Rush, until it comes to appear before the committee, to ensure that the Portfolio Committee, which must hold the executive accountable, is not complicit in unlawful conduct and is not found neglecting its duties. Should he fail to ensure that the committee sits urgently and summons Pakstau, he'll also be held culpable and liable.
Yes.
So our processes are in way. Let's wait for the next 24 hours and see whether the ANC will live up to its word of renewal.
Interesting developments indeed. And you will know, and I'm sure the rest of South Africa will know, that the ANC no longer runs government on its own, and there is a partner that has been persistent at holding them to account, even through the courts.
Where are they today?
Let's leave the conversation. We will hopefully invite you again once this announcement is made. Snawa Tambo, thank you very much for your time.